Chapter 3. Ancient Tragedy. The literature classroom was one of the few rooms at St. Oswald's that pretended to remember another age. Tall, narrow windows let in only the grey Suffolk light, smudged by pain, scratched by years of rain and the fingernails of generations of pupils. A row of heavy wooden desks ran all the way up to the blackboard, where Professor Llewellyn was just writing the last words of the lesson's topic, the decline of morals and the inevitability of fate in ancient tragedy. The chalk squealed on the word inevitability, as if even it had doubts. Rose sat in the front row, closer to the desk than to the windows. Her notebook lay open at a clean page, pen aligned neatly with the margin. At the top, she wrote the title of the lesson, leaving a space for the date she had not added yet. She liked to see it only once the class had truly begun, a way of putting off the moment the day was locked into a single number. Tragedy, the professor began, still facing the board, assumes that certain things happen not because the hero is foolish, but because the world is unrelenting. As always, Rose took notes. Between world and unrelenting, she left a small gap. She liked leaving herself pockets of space for doubt. The door opened only once the topic had moved on from definitions to the names of tragedians. The hinge squeaked loudly enough for several heads to turn. Rose did not have to look. She heard the familiar, drawn-out thud of a bag being dropped onto a back-row desk. Matt Whitby. Professor Llewellyn broke off mid-sentence but did not comment on the lateness. At St. Oswald's, some people had the right to squeaking doors. Rose tensed. Barely, but kept writing, noting down the name Aeschylus more carefully than usual so her hand wouldn't betray a twitch. She heard Matt take a seat at the back, the chair protesting as he leaned too heavily against it. A moment later came the tiresome sound. Click, pause, click. The teacher began to read an extract from a tragedy about a hero who breaks the law of the gods, convinced that he is in the right. Llewellyn's voice was even, stripped of pathos, as if she were analyzing a medical case rather than rebellion against destiny. Rose wrote down quotations, dates, short prompts, hubris, hamartia, tragic guilt, flaw or error. The clicking sound kept returning, like the ticking of a clock no one could see. She gave in and glanced sideways, pretending only to be looking at the glass case by the window that held framed old photographs. In the reflection, she could make out the back row. Matt sat slouched, one leg stuck out into the aisle, deliberately taking up more space than he was entitled to. His textbook lay shut at the edge of the desk. Instead, he held an old, scratched lighter in his hand, rolling it between his fingers, thumb pressing the wheel from time to time without striking a flame. Click, pause, click. His face was turned vaguely towards the board, but his gaze kept sliding away, to the windows, the ceiling, the place where Rose sat. In the reflection, his eyes were only dark smudges, yet she recognized the look from the hall and the staircase, absent and too present at the same time. She felt something inside her respond, not fear exactly, irritation. She turned back to her notebook just as Professor Llewellyn tapped the board with the chalk and called her name. Hartley. Rose raised her head. Give us, in one sentence, your definition of the tragic fault, the professor said, without reading the textbook. She did not need the book. It's the moment the hero makes a choice believing he is doing the right thing, she said. But his limitations, his nature, pride, fear, mean he chooses the worst possible way. And only then does it turn out that fate was less cruel to him than he was to himself. Llewellyn smiled, satisfied. "Good," she nodded. "Remember this, fate is a convenient excuse. The tragic fault is less romantic, but more truthful." She set the chalk down. "Mr. Whitby?" The click of the lighter stopped. "How would you respond to Miss Hartley's definition?" This time the silence in the room was thicker. Rose could feel eyes on the back of her neck. From behind came the faint rustle of movement as Matt straightened up, like someone who disliked being called on but knew he had no choice. "With all due respect to Miss Hartley," he said, and his voice flowed through the classroom smooth and unhurried, "I'd say tragedy is less about a bad decision and more about having no way out." Rose's fingers tightened on her pen. She did not look back, but she wrote down every word of his answer almost automatically. "The hero," Matt went on, "is born into a role he never chose. Everyone tells him who he is supposed to be, the gods, his family, the city. At some point he has to play the scene, even if he hates the script. He can speak louder, swear, improvise, but the act still ends exactly where someone wrote the stage directions." A few people snickered at stage directions. It sounded too textbookish in his mouth. "So, in your opinion," the professor interjected, "the hero is not responsible for anything?" Matt was quiet for a heartbeat. "He's responsible for the way he breaks," he said at last, "not for the fact that he breaks." Rose felt the cold from the windows slide under her skin. His words did not sound like a clever line for a lesson. They sounded like a sentence he had been repeating to himself for a long time. Professor Llewellyn leaned back against the desk. "An interesting perspective," she said dryly, "although we did ask for an interpretation of ancient tragedy, not your autobiography, Mr. Whitby." The laughter that followed was louder this time. Matt did not react. In the window's reflection, Rose saw him sit back down and reach once more for the lighter. Click. Pause. Click. Her own definition now rang in her head like a learned formula. His sounded like an accusation. She did not yet know that this was the lesson that would stay with her longer than most quotations from the plays. Matt rested his back against the cold corridor wall. Now he smelled of rain and chalk, but it took only a moment's effort to conjure a different scent. Chlorine, cheap whiskey, disinfectant. 2 years ago, St. Oswald's had looked the same, only his surname had a slightly better reputation. That evening had started with laughter in the dormitory, with a bottle of whiskey pulled from a tennis bag and the word farewell spoken with exaggerated solemnity. Matt had not been the one who suggested the party. He was the one they watched as the bottle went around. Whitby, the boy who would cope with anything. Then the corridor, whispered jokes, stumbles on the stairs, the lake beyond the playing fields, cold water, someone singing badly out of tune. The images blurred. What remained was the weight in his skull and the knowledge that nobody important should see any of it. The next day, there was no laughter. There was a summons to the headmaster's office. His father was already inside. He sat at the desk like an extra piece of furniture that did not match the rest, too expensive, too perfectly made. He smelled of cologne that clashed with the room's polish. The headmaster spoke at length in a flat voice about conduct unworthy of the name, betrayed trust, the necessity of decisive action. Matt caught isolated words, the rest drowned in the rush of blood in his ears. His father said nothing. The silence was always worst. Then came a name he had not expected. Hartley. The headmaster opened a slim file. Matt saw his own name, the list of offenses, the dates. Only after a moment did he notice the attachment, a prefect's report, a handful of short notes, one sentence underlined in a different pen. Following a suggestion by Rose Hartley, who reported a suspected instance of alcohol being brought into the dormitory. Suggestion, suspected, reported. Those words landed heavier than all the accusations put together. They stood out more sharply than the headmaster's face.
"Everyone drinks at St. Oswald's," his father said calmly at last, still not looking at him. "The difference lies in whether the wrong people get to see it."
He did not need to add that someone had just made sure they did. The decision came in the form of a brochure, a school with a stricter regime, a euphemism so clumsy it was almost transparent. Uniforms more military than academic, photographs of smiling boys who, in reality, ought to have been bruised. His father ran a finger over the crest on the cover. "If you're going to learn that a name carries obligations," he said, "you might as well learn it there." There was no shouting, only signatures, stamps, dates. In the report Matt glimpsed, Whitby appeared alongside the phrase "immediate action taken to protect the school's reputation," and just beside it, in brackets, report R. Hartley, Form V. Only then did he remember a detail from the day before. The corridor, still before exams, him laughing at some stupid joke, his friends making too much noise over the bottle sticking out of the bag, Rose Hartley walking past with an armful of books, a brief glance, cool, assessing, more annoyed by the noise than anything else. And her voice addressed to the duty teacher by the door. "Miss, I think someone's bringing alcohol into the dormitory. It might be worth checking before lights out." Nothing more. No names, no pointing fingers. He had barely noticed then. Now every word sounded like a signature under a sentence. 2 years later he sat in the back row, turning a lighter between his fingers instead of a pen, his eyes on the back of Rose's head, on the perfectly even handwriting, the immaculate margins, the calm profile of someone who was always on time and always had an answer. Maybe she had done it out of a sense of duty. Maybe because their noise had disturbed her revision. Or maybe simply because someone had told her this was what you did if you wanted to be a good pupil. He did not know. He knew only that without her intervention, his father would not have had such a convenient pretext. That was enough to turn his hatred from childish to logical. When the bell rang for the end of the last lesson, the classroom exhaled noise like a breath held too long. Chairs scraped. Someone swore after catching a bag on a desk. Someone else immediately launched into a joke about Odysseus and family therapy. Rose closed her notebook a little too carefully, evenly, slowly, as if the precision of the movement might keep anything from this lesson from scattering. The name Hartley still hung in the air, spoken moments before by the teacher in a purely academic tone. It sounded different on paper. In the report from 2 years ago, there was no Miss Hartley. There was R. Hartley, Form V, a dry bracket tacked on to a long line of charges against Matt. Report. She gathered her things and left the room among the last. The corridor was already crowded. A group of older boys stood by the wall, jackets undone, one button too far, laughter too loud. As she walked past, their conversation broke off a fraction of a second too quickly to be coincidence. Someone snorted. She did not look back. She did not quicken her pace either. She had practiced this indifference for so many years that it was almost convincing. The dining hall was no different. At the table where she had once sat with a knot of girls from her year, trays and bags now claimed the seats before anyone could. Caroline waved to her from the far end of the room, but by the time Rose reached her, the chairs around her friend were taken. So she edged a little further along, sitting on the margin, like a footnote too long to fit on the page. She did not need to ask what they were saying behind her back. At boarding school, gossip traveled along fixed routes.
2 years ago, Hartley turned Whitby in.
Later, she reported him because she likes telling on people. The most recent version, if she could do that to him, she'll do it to us. Caroline was the only one who never repeated it, perhaps because she truly took nothing seriously, or perhaps because she liked having someone she could call my best friend with a shot at the Cavendish Grant. More and more often, Rose felt like she was both a person and a trophy. The truth was less dramatic, but nobody wanted to hear it. That evening, she really had gone to the duty teacher only because the noise was wrecking her revision. Alcohol had been the argument the rule book understood best. She had not yet known the full price of the word report. She did now. Every time she saw Matt, she could feel it under her skin. She did not hate him for drinking or for disturbing her work. There had been plenty of other charges in that report that did not need her help. She hated that because of him, she had stepped out of the one role in which she felt safe, invisible, correct, harmless. She had become someone people could call the one who tells on others. That was why now, when he was back, every step he took along the corridor sounded like a reminder, every glance like a promise of possible revenge. She did not know whether Matt was planning anything, but she knew he had a right to it that others did not. Ambition, then, was not only a way out, it was a shield. If she was good enough, beyond question, no one would be able to say she had ruined Whitby out of jealousy. They would have to call it consistency of character, or, better still, the proper response to a breach of rules. For the moment, though, when she sat in the dining hall with a book open beside her plate, it looked less like strategy and more like a loneliness someone had mistaken for a choice.